Hello, insomniacs, fellow night owls. Or maybe you're an overnight driver, maybe security somewhere, or at the plant. Anyone pulled in the graveyard. Welcome to the night shift. Hello, listeners and or watchers. Welcome back, or welcome to the Night Shift Volumes, where usually I read stories from a Reddit thread, but tonight, because it's volume 13, we have a special story for such a special number. So if you're ready, let's begin. Tonight's story is called Room 13. It is written by M.R. James, retold by Stephen Colbert, and narrated by yours truly, me. My name is Sandra Pokorney. If you're ready, let's begin. Room 13. Viborg is a city in Denmark. It is an old city, but it has only a few buildings. A great fire destroyed most of the old town in 1726. Mr. Anderson is writing a book on the history of Denmark. So he went to Viborg in 1891, and he wanted to study the history of the town. He stayed in an old building in Viborg, the Golden Lion Inn. The inn was nearly 350 years old. Anderson asked the landlord for a large room. The landlord of the Golden Lion showed him two rooms, room number 12 and room number 14. There were 3 large windows in each room, and the windows looked onto the street, so Anderson chose room number 12. In the evening, Anderson went downstairs for supper. He saw a blackboard. The names of all the guests were written on the blackboard. Anderson saw that the inn was full. There were no empty rooms. Anderson noticed that there was no room number 13. 13 is an unlucky number, and many people don't want to stay in a room with an unlucky number. When Anderson went upstairs to bed, he tried to unlock his door. It did not open. Then he saw that he'd made a mistake. It was the wrong room. The number on the door was number 13. He heard someone moving inside the room. "I'm very sorry," he said, and went to the door of the room of number 12. Perhaps the servants sleep in room number 13. He decided he'd ask the landlord about it the next day. So Anderson lit the oil lamp and looked around. Room number 12 looked smaller by lamplight. Anderson was tired and went to bed. In the morning, Anderson went to the town hall. He wanted to study the town records. He read many very old papers. The oldest records were from the 16th century. There were some letters from the Bishop of Viborg dated from 1560. The bishop had owned 3 or 4 houses in the city, and he had rented a house to a man called Nicholas Franken. The townspeople of Viborg did not like Nicholas Franken. Some people wrote to the bishop to say that Franken was a bad man. They said that he was a magician, and that they wanted Franken to leave the city. The bishop said that Nicholas Franken had done nothing wrong. He did not believe that Franken was a magician. It was time for town hall to close, and as Anderson was leaving, the town clerk spoke to him. "I see you're reading about the bishop and Franken," the clerk said. "I'm interested in them, but I do not know where Franken lived. Many of town records were burnt in the Great Fire of 1726. Anderson thanked the clerk and went back to the Golden Lion. He wanted to ask the landlord about room number 13, but he was busy. So Anderson went upstairs and stopped outside the door of number 13. Again heard someone inside the room. The person was walking around and talking in a strange voice. Anderson went to his own room. He decided that number 12 was too small. So he also decided he was going to ask the landlord for a larger room. And also he was angry because his suitcase was missing. It had been on the table beside the wall. Both the table and the suitcase had disappeared. Perhaps the landlord had moved the suitcase to a storage room. Anderson wanted it back. It was too late to call the landlord, so Anderson went to the window and lit a cigarette. He looked out the window. There was a tall house on the opposite side of the street. His lamp was behind him, so he saw a shadow on the wall of the house opposite. The person in room 13 was also standing at the window. Anderson saw a second shadow on the wall of the house opposite. This second shadow was strange. The person in room 13 was wearing a tall, pointed hat, and also the light from room 13 was red, like the light was the color of blood. Anderson opened the window, put his head outside. He tried to see the person in the next room. He saw the sleeve of a long white coat, but that was all. The person in room 13 suddenly moved away from the window, and the red light went out. Anderson finished his cigarette, and he left the ashtray on the window ledge, turned out the lamp, and went to bed. Next morning, the maid brought hot water to the room. He woke up and remembered his suitcase. "Where's my suitcase, please?" he asked. The maid laughed and pointed. The suitcase was on the table beside the wall. It was exactly where he had left it. He noticed another strange thing. His ashtray was on the middle window ledge. He clearly remembered smoking a cigarette by the end window next to number 13. He finished dressing and decided to visit his neighbor in the next room, room 13. He was surprised when he went to the door of the next room. The next room had number 14. And he was frightened. Was he going mad? Was he crazy? After breakfast, went to the town hall and read some more of the old papers. He found only one more letter from the bishop about Nicholas Franken. A group of townspeople had tried to make him leave Viborg. They'd gone to Franken's house, but Franken had disappeared. The bishop wrote that no one knew where he had gone. And that was the end of the matter. That evening, Anderson spoke to the landlord of the Golden Lion Inn. "Why is there no room 13 in the inn?" he asked. "Well, many people won't sleep in room number 13, the landlord replied. "They say it's unlucky." "Well, then who is in your room number 13? asked Anderson. "There isn't a room number 13, the landlord said. "Your room is next to room number 14. "Of course," said Anderson. "I must have made a mistake. Would you like to come up to number 12 for a glass of brandy and a cigar?" "I'd like to very much," said the landlord. They went upstairs together. They went past room number 10 and room number 11 to reach number 12. The landlord looked at the inside of number 12. "Well, this room looks very small," he said. Anderson poured 2 glasses of brandy, and both men lit their cigars. Anderson opened the window to let out the smoke, and there was a red light and a shadow on the wall of the house opposite. The light came from number 13. The shadow was dancing wildly, but there was no noise. Anderson sat down to drink his brandy. He wanted to tell the landlord about the strange things that he had seen, and suddenly a terrible noise came from the next room. "Is that a cat?" asked Anderson. "Or is there a madman in the room next door?" "It's Mr. Jensen," said the landlord. "He often stays in room 14. The poor man must be ill." A loud knock sounded on the door of Anderson's room, and suddenly a man opened the door and came in. "Please stop that terrible noise," the man said. "Mr. Jensen," the landlord said, "we thought you were making the noise." The 3 men looked at each other for a moment, and then went out quickly into the corridor. The noise was coming from the door of room number 13. The landlord banged on the door and turned the handle. The door was locked. "I'll bring men to break the door down," the landlord shouted and ran down the stairs. Jensen and Anderson stood outside number 13. The noise inside the room became louder and wilder. "I want to tell you something strange," Jensen said to Anderson. "My room has 3 windows in the day and only 2 at night. Perhaps you think I am mad. Good Lord, my room is the same, said Anderson. My room looks smaller at night than during the day. The door of number 13 opened suddenly, and an arm came out. The arm was thin, covered in gray hairs. The fingernails were long and dirty. Anderson shouted, pulled Jensen away from the door. The arm disappeared, and the door closed. The sound of mad laughter came from number 13. Thanks to all of you for listening and or watching, and you have a great night at work.